At 11:40 on a Tuesday night, in the worst snow this town had seen in 6 years, a woman I'd spent 4 months lying to myself about stood in her doorway in wool socks and an old flannel robe and said, quiet enough that I almost lost it under the wind, "Stay. The house is warmer when you're in it." And I want to be honest about what I did with that because it isn't flattering. I stood there, on her porch, snow going down the back of my collar, a wrench still in my hand, my truck idling at the curb with the hazards ticking. And I said, "I'm not proud of this. Thermostat should hold now. You're all set." You're all set. Like she'd asked me about her return air filter, like a woman does not, as a general rule, whisper you into her house at midnight to discuss ductwork. That's the kind of coward I was, past tense. I'm working on it. But to explain how I got to that porch and why those 8 words nearly took my knees out from under me, I have to back all the way up because that moment doesn't mean anything without the 4 months stacked in front of it. And it doesn't mean anything at all until you know who I am. My name's Danny Marsh. I'm 41. I fix heat for a living. Furnaces, heat pumps, air handlers, the old oil dinosaurs still wheezing in the basements of houses older than my grandfather. If your house went cold in January, I'm the guy who showed up in a work coat with cold hands and told you it was your igniter, and you were right to be annoyed about the bill. 20 years of it. I know every boiler on the east side of this town by its sound. I can stand in a doorway and tell you what's wrong before I take my boots off. And I'm right more than I've got any business being. What I could not do for a very long time was fix anything about my own life that didn't come with a wiring diagram. I live on Delmar Street, in a 2-bedroom I've owned since before the divorce, which is the wound. So let's get it out of the way. Her name was Carrie. We were married 9 years. She didn't leave in a fire. She left the way heat leaves a house with bad insulation. Slow and then all at once, and you don't notice the exact hour it's gone. You just notice one morning you can see your breath in your own kitchen. That was 8 years back. And here's the thing nobody warns you about being alone. You can get good at it. You can get so good at it that it stops feeling like a wound and starts feeling like a skill. I had my route, my recliner, my one good pan, my games on Sunday. I told myself that was peace. It was a very organized kind of hiding, and I'd have gone on hiding forever if a moving truck hadn't pulled up across the street on a gray Saturday in October. That was Nora. I watched from my porch with a coffee, the way you do, cataloging. One woman, no help. A small rented truck she'd clearly packed herself, everything in matching boxes, every box labeled on 2 sides in block letters, which, I'd learned, told you everything about her before she said a word. She carried a desk chair up the walk like it had personally wronged her. She had dark hair going gray at the temples, and she wasn't hiding it. And she moved with the specific efficiency of someone who had learned to need exactly no one and had built a whole life to prove it. So I did what my mother raised me to do. I set down my coffee and I walked over and I said, "You want a hand with the big stuff?" She straightened up, looked at me, really looked top to bottom the way you'd read a quote before you signed it, and said, "How much?" Not "no thanks," not "I've got it." How much? Like every kindness in the world came with an invoice, and she'd been burned enough times to always ask to see it first. "Nothing," I said. "I'm Danny. I live there." I pointed at my house like an idiot, like she couldn't see it. "Nora," she said. And then after a beat she clearly didn't enjoy, "I've got it." And she picked up the next box. That was the whole first conversation. 4 words from her. And I walked back across the street a little stung and a lot curious. And I told myself I was just being neighborly, and I want to be honest. I didn't let myself examine what else it was. Not yet. It was October. I had time. That's what I thought. I had all the time in the world. For 3 weeks after that, Nora and I existed the way 2 careful people do on a small street. A nod at the mailboxes, a lifted hand from behind a windshield, nothing you could build on. I learned things secondhand the way you do. I learned from Ruthie Alcaraz 2 doors down, who has never in her life missed a thing that happened on Delmar Street and considers this a civic duty. That Nora did the books for half the small businesses in town. Bookkeeper, Ruthie told me over her fence, thrilled to have information. Works from home, quiet, lights on till all hours, no husband that I've seen. And then she looked at me in a way I chose not to understand. A bookkeeper. That landed. It explained the labeled boxes, the way she'd read me like a quote. Here was a woman whose whole profession was making sure the numbers matched, that nothing went unaccounted for, that at the end of the day, every dollar had a home and a reason. I filed it away. I didn't know yet that her habit of keeping accounts didn't clock out at 5. I didn't know she kept a book. I found out because her heat died. It was the first real cold of the year, a Thursday, and I knew her furnace was in trouble before she did. I'd heard it from my own driveway, that particular hard rattle on startup that means a blower motor's not long for this world. But she didn't call me. Of course she didn't. Ruthie called me. Her heat's off, Ruthie said, delighted and grave. I can tell. Her breath's fogging behind the window. So I did the thing you're not supposed to do. I walked over uninvited with my bag, and I knocked. And when she opened the door with a blanket around her shoulders and that same wary how much look already loading up behind her eyes, I said, "Your blower motor's dying. I heard it Tuesday. It's going to be 9 degrees tonight. Let me look at it, and we'll argue about the money after." She stood there a second, cold coming off the house behind her in a sheet, pride and arithmetic fighting it out across her face. The specific stiffness of someone who'd learned the hard way that accepting help just means you owe, and owing is where they get you. Then the cold won, the way cold does. She stepped back. "Fine," she said, "but I'm paying you." Her place was neat to the point of being a little sad. One plant, one chair angled at one lamp, a desk that was clearly the most lived-in surface in the house. And on that desk, next to the laptop and the labeled folders, a green cloth-covered ledger. Cloth-covered, hand-numbered, the kind you buy on purpose. I clocked it and didn't think anything of it. Bookkeeper. Of course she had a ledger. The motor was shot, but I had a rebuilt one that fit on the truck. I keep the common ones. And I had her heat back inside 40 minutes. When I came up from the basement wiping my hands, she was standing by that desk with the ledger open and a pen already moving. "What do I owe you?" she said. Not a question, a transaction. "The part's 40, I said. "Labor's on the house. You're a neighbor." She looked up. "That's not how it works." "It's exactly how it works. I do it all the time." "For everyone," she said, "or for me?" And there was an edge on it. It's not flirtation. I want to be clear. Nothing that easy. Suspicion. The edge of a woman who'd been handed a lot of free things by a man once and learned they all had prices printed on the back in ink you couldn't see until later. "For everyone," I said, which was true. "Ruthie's got me on retainer and banana bread." That got the corner of her mouth, barely. She wrote something in the green book. I watched her do it, and I asked, because I couldn't help it, "What are you writing?" "What I owe you," she said without looking up. $40, one repair, I keep track. Of favors? Of everything. She closed the book. "I don't like loose ends, Danny. I don't like owing. You'll get your 40 and a little extra, and then we're square." And I should have let it go. I had the 40 in my hand and a warm house behind me and an easy exit. But something about that word, square, sat wrong in my chest. And I heard myself say the sentence that started the whole thing. "Some things you don't get to square up," I said. "Some things a person just does." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she wrote something else in the book and didn't tell me what it was. What followed, over the back half of that autumn and into December, was the politest war I have ever been part of. Because I did not stop. That's my flaw, and I'll own it. I don't know how to be near a thing that's broken and leave it broken. I saw her gutter sagging under wet leaves, and I cleaned it on a Sunday while she was out with a client. I salted her walk before the first ice because I salt mine, and it's 4 extra steps. I noticed her porch light had burned out, and I put a new bulb in for my garage because a dark porch on a single woman's house bothered me in a way I didn't examine. And Nora paid me back for every single one of them, to the cent, and then passed it. The gutter got me a loaf of banana bread on my porch. Ruthie's recipe, I found out, which meant the two of them had had a conversation about me, which I also chose not to examine. The salt got me a $12 bag of ice melt left on my step with a note that said, "Now we're even on the walk." The light bulb got me a 4-pack of the exact bulb, better wattage than mine, sitting on my porch rail with no note at all, because by then a note would have been admitting something. It became a rhythm. It became the thing we did. I'd do a small, quiet thing and pretend it was nothing. And she'd repay it with interest and pretend that was nothing too, and neither of us said the obvious thing, which was that you don't keep a running tab with somebody unless you plan on them sticking around. A ledger is a kind of promise. You don't open an account you're closing tomorrow. We started talking in the doorways of these transactions, short at first, then less short. "You know," I told her one evening, handing back a casserole dish she'd sent something over in, "most people just say thank you and let it ride." "Most people," she said, "end up owing somebody something they can't pay back, and then that somebody owns a little piece of them forever." She took the dish. "I don't do owing. I did owing once. It was a whole marriage." That was the first crack. The first time she handed me a piece of the wound instead of a repayment. I didn't grab at it. You don't grab at a thing like that. You just leave your hand open and see if she sets any more of it down. "He kept score?" I said. "He kept score," she said. "And then he changed the rules on what things cost. You learn to keep your own books so nobody can tell you what you owe. You do your own math. You stay even. You stay free." "That sounds exhausting." "It's the opposite of exhausting," she said. "It's the only rest I get." And she went inside. I stood on her step in the cold with that one for a while. Ruthie, meanwhile, was having the time of her life. Ruthie Alcaraz had appointed herself the historian of this thing before either of us admitted there was a thing. "You did her gutters," she informed me at the mailbox, like I didn't know. "In November, on a Sunday." A pause loaded with meaning. "You've never once done my gutters, Danny." "Your gutters are fine, Ruthie." She adjusted her scarf. "You know she leaves her porch light on now since you fixed it, all night." She let that sit. A woman who lives alone and keeps her porch light on all night is either scared of something or waiting on somebody. She doesn't strike me as scared. "Ruthie." "I'm just reading the street," she said, wounded and delighted, already turning to go. "It's what I do. You read furnaces, I read porches." And she was gone before I could argue that a porch light is not a furnace and doesn't mean anything, which, I want to be honest, I was arguing mostly with myself, and losing. Because I'd started noticing my own behavior, and it embarrassed me. I'd started timing my Saturday coffee to when she got her mail. I'd started keeping her 4-pack of bulbs in the drawer instead of using them, because using them felt like closing something I didn't want closed. I'd started, God help me, checking the long-range forecast and feeling something that was not dread when it said snow. By January, there was a routine, and we never once called it that. It went like this. She'd be at her desk in the front window in the evenings, that lamp on, doing other people's numbers till all hours, the way Ruthie said. And 2 or 3 nights a week, I'd be coming back from a late call, cold and beat, and her light would be on, and this is going to sound like nothing, I'd flick my porch light twice before I went in. Off, on, just a hello. Just a, here's a guy who made it home. And most nights, a few seconds later, her light would flick back. Off, on, here's a woman still awake. That was it. That was the whole thing for weeks. 2 people blinking porch lights at each other across a dark street like a couple of lighthouses that had agreed not to discuss it. Then the coffee started. She left a thermos on my porch one brutal morning. "You looked half dead scraping your windshield," the note said. "Consider it a business expense." And I washed it and left it back full of my coffee, which is better than her coffee, I'll say that to her face, and that turned into a thing. A thermos going back and forth. Some mornings we'd both end up on our steps at the same time, 60 feet apart, holding the same thermos rotation, and we'd just stand there. Drink. Not say much. It's a strange kind of intimacy, standing in the cold with somebody at a distance, both pretending you came outside for the weather. There was one morning that stuck to me. Middle of January, brutal. the kind of cold that makes the snow squeak. I came out and she was already on her step, and she had 2 mugs going instead of the thermos. And without a word, she held one up at me across the 60 feet, an offer, a dare, I couldn't tell which. And I want to be honest, I stood on my own step and I drank the coffee she'd made me from across a frozen street, and she drank hers. And we didn't say one word the whole time, and it was the closest thing to a date I'd been on in 8 years. When I lifted the empty mug at her to say thanks, she just nodded once, this small, precise nod, a woman confirming a figure, and went inside. And I stood out there a beat longer than I needed to. It was 7 degrees. I wasn't cold. That means something. I knew it meant something. I still didn't write it down. One of those mornings she crossed the street. First time she'd done it. Stood at the bottom of my steps with the thermos and said, "Your furnace. What's it sound like to you?" "Mine, I mean." "Yours is going to make it through the winter," I said. "Barely. It's the heat exchanger, so it's old. It's cracking. Not dangerous yet. But next winter you're buying a furnace, Nora. And it's going to be a bad number, and I want you braced for it now so you can save." She nodded slow, doing the math already. I could see it. "How bad?" $4,000, maybe 5. "Okay," she said, not flinching. A woman who did her own math and everyone else's and had never once let a bill surprise her. "Thank you for telling me straight. People don't." She looked at me over the thermos. "You always tell people straight?" "About furnaces," I said, "always." "And about everything else?" And there it was. The opening, 60 degrees of open door, and I want to be honest about what I did with it. I made a joke. "Furnaces are simpler," I said. "Furnaces you can put a gauge on." She almost smiled, almost. And then she said the thing I've thought about more than anything else she ever said to me before the porch, before the snow. She said, "You're careful, like me." A beat. I used to think careful was a virtue. And she looked down the street at nothing and she said, "And now I think careful is just being scared with better manners." And she handed me the empty thermos and crossed back to her side and left me standing there holding it, holding that whole sentence, because I knew right down in the gut that she wasn't talking about furnaces, and she wasn't only talking about herself. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay there and I did something I'm not good at, which is the honest kind of math, the kind that doesn't balance. I ran the account. On one side, I was 41. I had a root and a recliner and a piece I'd built out of a divorce and 8 years of practice. And it worked. It did not hurt anymore. I had gotten good at it. On the other side, a woman across the street who kept a ledger because a man had taught her that love was a debt with a moving interest rate, and who was, I was starting to understand, the first thing in 8 years that had made me want to be worse at being alone. And I did what I'd been doing since October. I didn't let myself write the total down. I might have gotten away with not writing it down for another year if it weren't for Sal. Sal Farrow runs the auto shop over on Ridge, and he's been my best friend since we were 15, and neither of us has gotten appreciably wiser since, but he's got one gift, and it's that he reads me better than I want to be read and always has. We do a standing thing Thursday nights, his garage, 2 folding chairs and whatever's cold and 1 space heater I fixed for him a decade ago that he refuses to replace out of what he calls loyalty and I call cheapness. I'd been talking about Nora for a month without noticing I was talking about Nora. I know this because Sal noticed. I'd tell him about a call, and the call would somehow have Nora in it. She waved. She left a thermos. She said this thing about careful. And about the 4th Thursday of this, Sal set down his beer, looked at me over that space heater and said, "You're going to marry that woman?" I said, "Who?" He said, "Who?" Flat. Disgusted. "The bookkeeper, Danny, Nora, the one you've mentioned every Thursday since Thanksgiving, the one whose gutters you did." "You know you've never done my gutters?" "You and Ruthie should start a club." "We should," he said. "We'd have a lot to talk about." He leaned forward. "How long you known me?" 30 years. I have watched you fix every broken thing in this town. Furnaces, my heater, my marriage, that one bad year, my kids' go-kart, the church boiler for free every winter. You cannot walk past a broken thing. It's a sickness. And I've watched you for 8 years do the one thing you're actually scared of, which is fix nothing about the fact that you go home to an empty house and call it quiet. I like the quiet. You tolerate the quiet, Sal said. There's a difference. And you of all people should hear it. You listen to furnaces for a living. You can hear when something's wrong under the hum. Listen to your own house sometime. I didn't say anything. The space heater ticked. Here's what I think, Sal said, gentler now. Because he's an idiot, but he's not cruel. I think you found somebody as scared as you are. And I think that's the only reason you let her get close. Because she wasn't going to ask you for anything. She keeps a little book so nobody has to. Two careful people, blinking porch lights. You think that's safe. Danny, that's not safe. That's just slow. You're going to careful and manners each other right into being 70 and alone across the street from each other, both of you telling Ruthie you like the quiet. That one landed somewhere structural. Because it was the same word. Careful. She'd said it standing at the bottom of my steps. Careful is just being scared with better manners. And here was Sal, who'd never met her, arriving at the identical diagnosis from the other direction. And when two different people read the same crack in you without comparing notes, you can't call it a bad reading anymore. You have to call it the wall. What if I do the thing, I said. And I hated how young my voice sounded. And I wreck it. Right now it's good. Right now she's across the street, and it's easy and nobody owes anybody. If I say something and I'm wrong, I don't just lose the woman, Sal. I lose the street. I lose the porch lights. I got to look at that house every morning for the rest of my life knowing I broke the one good thing. Yeah, Sal said. That's the price. That's what it costs. He picked his beer back up. You want to know what the guarantee costs? The guarantee that you never get hurt, never get wrong, never wreck a single thing? It costs everything, Danny. It costs the whole rest of your life. You've been paying it for 8 years. How's the peace treating you? And he took a drink and let me sit in it. And the space heater I'd fixed ticked away in the cold, doing its one job, keeping a small space warm. And I thought about how that was the most useful I'd ever managed to be to anybody. I fix the thing that keeps you warm, and then I go home to a house I let go cold on purpose. I drove home that night the long way. Her light was on. I flicked mine twice. Hers flicked back. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a hello. It felt like a question I'd been letting her ask into the dark for months without once answering it straight. After that Thursday, I couldn't unsee it. I started catching myself. All the small things I'd been calling neighborly, I started seeing the true size of them. I didn't keep the good bulbs in the drawer because I was thrifty. I didn't wash her thermos and fill it with my better coffee because I was polite. I didn't check the forecast for snow and feel something warm instead of tired because I loved my job. I was a man who'd spent 8 years getting so good at being alone that I'd built a whole quiet life as insulation. And somewhere in there, a woman across the street had gotten under it past all of it. And I'd let her, one light bulb at a time, precisely because she never asked me to. Sal was right. That was the whole trick of it. She was safe to fall for because she kept her own books. I never had to risk the word out loud. The ledger did our talking. The porch lights did our talking. We'd built a whole relationship out of things neither of us had to say, and I finally understood that the unsaid part wasn't the sweet part. It was the coward's part. It was careful with better manners. I decided I was going to tell her. That's the part I want a little credit for, small as it is. I decided. I didn't do it, not for 2 more weeks because I'm me, but I made the decision, and I started carrying it around like a wrench in my coat, waiting for the right moment, which is a thing people like me tell ourselves so we can keep not doing the thing. There is no right moment. I know that now. There's just the moment you finally stop waiting. Mine got picked for me. It came at the end of February. The storm they'd been threatening all week and nobody believed. The one that finally actually came, 16 inches and still falling by 10 at night. The kind of cold that gets into the walls of a house and goes looking for the weak spot. And Nora's furnace had a weak spot. I'd told her about it in January. The cracked heat exchanger, the old exhausted thing I'd said would make it through the winter, barely. Barely ran out at 11:40 on a Tuesday night. I was up. I don't sleep in storms. Storms are my season. Storms are when the phone rings, and I was standing at my own window watching the street disappear when her furnace quit. I didn't hear it this time. I felt it. I watched her front window, that lamp still on, her still at the desk in a blanket, and I watched her look up at nothing the way you do when the hum you've stopped hearing suddenly stops. When the house goes quiet in the specific way a house goes quiet when the heat dies and the cold starts counting down. I saw her get up. I saw her go to the thermostat. I saw her stand there in the lamplight tapping it, doing the math, a woman who did her own math and knew she'd been braced since January, that this was the bad number arriving a full winter early at midnight in a blizzard. She didn't call me, of course she didn't. She'd have sat in that house in a coat until morning before she'd have added to the ledger at midnight in a storm. I didn't wait to be called. I put my boots on over bare feet. I want that detail in there because Ruthie would want it in there. Grabbed my bag and a rebuilt exchanger I wasn't even sure would fit. And I went out into 16 inches of snow with my hazards on and my truck barely making it the 60 feet across the street. And I banged on her door. She opened it in that flannel robe, blanket over it, breath already fogging in her own front hall, and the look on her face wasn't the how much look. That's how I knew it was bad. She was too cold and too tired and too caught to armor up. She just looked at me standing there in the snow, and something crossed her face that I'd been waiting 4 months to see her stop hiding. "Danny," she said, "it's midnight. It's a blizzard. I don't have $4,000 at midnight. I didn't come for $4,000. I said, "Let me in. You're freezing. We'll argue about the money never." She let me in. That, by itself, coming from her at midnight, was the biggest thing she'd done since October, and I don't think she even clocked it, but I did. I file that kind of thing. She let me into the cold house, and she stood there hugging the blanket while I went down to the basement and got on my knees in front of that dying furnace with a flashlight in my teeth. It took me an hour and a half. The exchanger fit? Barely. The way everything about us was barely fit, barely made it, barely on time. My hands went stupid with cold. Twice I had to stop and just breathe on them. And the whole time I could hear her up above me, not going to bed, moving around the kitchen. And after a while, the smell of coffee came down the basement stairs, and I understood she was making it for me in a freezing house at 1 a.m, because it was the only currency she trusted. Because even now, even scared, she was trying to stay even with me. She couldn't help it any more than I could help fixing the furnace. We were both just doing the one thing we knew how to do that meant I care, and hoping the other one could read it. I got the heat lit at 120. I heard the burner catch and hold that good deep sound. And I sat back on my heels in her basement and felt the first warm air come up off the register, and I thought, plainly, with no joke in front of it for once, I am not ready to go back across that street tonight. I came up the stairs wiping my hands. She was at the counter with 2 cups of coffee and the green ledger open in front of her and a pen in her hand. And I watched her, in a house that was finally warming up, do the only thing she knew how to do with a feeling. She started to write the debt. "Nora," I said, "put the pen down." "I have to," she said, and her voice wasn't sharp. It was almost pleading, which I'd never heard from her. "You came out at midnight in a blizzard, barefoot. I saw your ankles. You don't even have socks on, and I can't. If I don't write it down, I don't know what to do with it. Do you understand? If it's a number, I know what to do with it. Tell me the number, Danny. Let me stay even with you, please." And I crossed the kitchen, and I put my hand flat on the open book, over her numbers, the way you'd level a surface. And I said the thing I'd been carrying around for 2 weeks like a wrench in my coat. "There is no number," I said. "There was never going to be a number. Nora, I've been in love with you since about November, and I did your gutters and your salt and your light bulb and your furnace, and none of it was ever a favor, and you were never going to be able to pay it back because it wasn't a loan. Some things you don't get to square up. I told you that in October. I meant it about a $40 motor. I mean it about all of it now. She went very still. The pen stopped. The furnace hummed under us, doing its one honest job, keeping a small space warm. I keep a book, she said, finally quiet, so nobody can own a piece of me. I don't want a piece of you, I said. I want to be somebody you don't have to keep books on. I want to be the one entry you leave open. My voice was doing something I couldn't control. You said careful is just being scared with better manners. You were right. I've been scared for 8 years with excellent manners. I'm done. I'd rather wreck the whole street than blink a porch light at you for one more winter. She looked at me for a long time. Snow ticking the window, coffee going cold in 2 cups, and then she closed the ledger, she closed the book, and she came around the counter. And she didn't say anything grand because she isn't grand, she's precise. She stood close enough that I could feel she was still shivering, and she said it quiet, the thing that had knocked my knees out on the porch of my memory. Except now I'll be honest with you because I've been honest this whole time. It didn't happen on a porch. It happened right there in that warming kitchen. I moved it to the porch when I told you the start of this because for 4 months the truth felt too big to have happened over a coffee at a counter, and a man like me needs a doorway and some weather to hold a thing that size. Stay, she said. The house is warmer when you're in it. And this time, this is the part I want credit for, I didn't say the thermostat should hold. I put down the wrench. I stayed. Here's where I'm supposed to tell you it was easy after that, and it wasn't, because nothing worth keeping is, and because you don't unteach a woman a lifetime of keeping books in one warm kitchen. For a while, she still tried to pay me for things. Old habits. She'd slip a 20 in my coat, leave a thermos, try to keep us even, and I let her mostly because I understood by then that the ledger was never really about money. It was about safety. It was the only way she'd ever been allowed to feel like she wasn't at anybody's mercy. You don't take a thing like that away from a person. You just slowly give them enough winters of proof that they can set it down on their own. She set it down about 6 months in. We were living in her house by then. Mine got rented to a young couple. And Ruthie considers the whole arrangement her personal triumph and mentions it constantly. One evening, Nora was at that same desk in the front window, and I came in from a late call, cold and beat. And I flicked the porch light twice out of pure habit before I remembered I lived here now, and there was nobody across the street to flick back. And she laughed at me from the desk. She has a good laugh. Rare. Worth working for. And she said, "Come here, I want to show you something." The green ledger was open, and on a fresh page, in her block letters, she'd written my name at the top. And under it, where the numbers go, where every debt she'd ever tracked had a figure and a date and a settled line drawn under it, she'd written one line. It said, Danny, balance, open, do not settle. That's the only account I keep now, she said. It's the only one that doesn't close. And I want to be honest because I've been honest with you this whole time. I'm a 41-year-old man who fixes furnaces for a living. And I sat down on the arm of her chair in that warm house, and I cried a little. And she didn't make it weird, she just put her hand flat on the back of my neck the way you'd level a surface and let me. We got married the following fall, in the backyard, small. Sal was my best man and gave a speech that was 90% about how he diagnosed the whole thing over a space heater and expected to be thanked. Which fine, Sal. You were right. Ruthie cried more than my mother did. Nora wore gray and didn't dye her temples. And I have never in my life seen anything I wanted to spend more winters looking at. Her furnace, the new one, the good one I finally sold her at cost, don't tell her, actually she knows she does the books, runs quiet and clean, and I check it more than I need to because checking on the thing that keeps her warm is the closest I've got to a prayer. And on cold nights when the wind's up and the house ticks and settles around us, she'll still say it sometimes low, half asleep, like she's making sure it's still true. Stay. The house is warmer when you're in it. And it is. That's not a line. And it's not a metaphor. It's just the truest thing I know. A house is only walls until there's somebody in it who makes the cold worth coming home through. So that's my story. That's the whole account. Open, unsettled, the way I want it. Now I've got to ask you, because I always do. Have you ever stood in a doorway with the exact right thing sitting behind your teeth and said something about the thermostat instead? Have you ever kept your own kind of book, a running tab of what you owe and what you're owed? All the little ways you keep yourself even and safe and just a little bit alone? What would you have done at 11:40 on that Tuesday with the snow coming down and somebody finally quietly asking you to stay? Tell me your story in the comments. I read them, all of them, at shirts. I keep track. And if this one warmed you up even a little, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.